When Frederick William came to power in 1640, in the midst of the devastating 30 Years' War, the lands he inherited were a geographical and political nightmare. Brandenburg-Prussia was not a unified state, but a patchwork of disconnected territories scattered across northern Germany and Poland, with no natural defenses. His core territory, the Electorate of Brandenburg, was a poor sandy plain around the small city of Berlin, mockingly known as the sandbox of the Holy Roman Empire. His most prestigious title came from the distant Duchy of Prussia, a fiefdom he technically held as a vassal of the King of Poland. Worse than the geography was the condition of his realm. For 2 decades, Brandenburg had been the primary battleground for the marauding armies of the Swedes and the Holy Roman Empire. The land had been systematically ravaged. Its population was decimated, its towns sacked, its farms burned, and its economy completely shattered. The small army his father had maintained was an ill-disciplined band of mercenaries whose loyalty was questionable. Political power lay not with the Elector, but with the powerful feudal nobles, the Junkers, who controlled the regional diets, estates, and fiercely resisted any attempt by the central ruler to levy taxes or raise an army without their consent. At the age of 20, Frederick William inherited a state that was weak, broken, and on the verge of complete dissolution. Unlike his predecessors, Frederick William had been shaped by a world outside the confines of his ruined German lands. He had spent his formative teenage years in the Dutch Republic, the most dynamic and commercially advanced society in Europe. There, he had witnessed firsthand the power of a modern, centralized state. He saw how a small nation could achieve immense wealth and military power through naval might, efficient administration, and religious tolerance. He was a devout Calvinist, a minority faith in his predominantly Lutheran lands, which gave him a personal understanding of the precarity of religious minorities. He learned the arts of war and statecraft at the court of Frederick Henry of Orange, one of the great generals of the age. This Dutch education instilled in him a deeply pragmatic, unsentimental, and innovative approach to power. He returned to Brandenburg with a clear and unwavering vision. To survive, his state needed 2 things above all else: a powerful standing army and a centralized treasury to pay for it. All other considerations were secondary to this overriding need for security and self-preservation. Frederick William's first and greatest challenge was to break the power of the estates and establish his absolute authority to raise taxes and fund a standing army. This was the central struggle of his reign. The nobles of Brandenburg, and especially the fiercely independent Junkers of Prussia, saw their right to grant or deny taxes as their most sacred privilege. The Elector began with a mix of cunning, negotiation, and brute force. In 1653, he convened the Brandenburg Diet and made a grand bargain. He offered the nobles a deal. In exchange for a substantial grant of money to fund his new army, he would confirm all their traditional privileges, including their total authority over the peasants on their estates and their exemption from most taxes. In effect, he bought the loyalty of the nobility by cementing the institution of serfdom, a harsh but politically effective move. In the Duchy of Prussia, the resistance was far stiffer. The estates in the city of Königsberg defied him, appealing to their overlord, the King of Poland. Frederick William's response was decisive and ruthless. In 1662, he marched his new army into the city, arrested the ringleaders of the opposition, and forced the Prussian estates to submit to his authority. He had established the crucial principle that the rulers need to defend the state, superseded the nobles' right to control the purse. He now had the freedom to build the 2 pillars of his new state: a powerful army and a centralized bureaucracy to collect the taxes to pay for it. The foundation of Prussian absolutism was laid. With his new financial independence, Frederick William devoted himself to his life's great passion, the creation of a professional standing army. For him, the Army was not just a tool of foreign policy. It was the very embodiment and guarantor of the state. It was a source of national pride, an engine of social discipline, and the ultimate argument in the brutal world of European power. Part 4. The Army First. A ruler is treated with no politics. He famously declared that alliances are good, but a force of one's own is better. He consideration if he does not have troops and means of his own. This was Frederick William's core belief. The lesson started small, but his focus was relentless. He integrated the various mercenary garrisons into a single, unified force under his direct burned into him by the horrors of the 30 Years' War. While other rulers built lavish palaces, he built an army, a command. He introduced standardized uniforms, discipline, and training, drilling his men with a rigor that became the hallmark of the future, became his all-consuming passion. He was the first German ruler to maintain a large standing army in peacetime, a revolutionary Prussian military. He established a general war commissariat, a revolutionary institution that was more than just a military supply office. It became an expensive concept. Starting with the small grant from the Brandenburg estates, he meticulously built his new force. He introduced a parallel civil service, a highly efficient and centralized bureaucracy responsible for tax collection, economic administration, and recruitment, all geared towards the single purpose of maintaining the army. Unlike other rulers, Frederick William did not disband his army in times of peace. Discipline, regular pay, a novelty that ensured loyalty and professional training. He created a general war commissariat. It was a permanent standing force, always ready for war. By the end of his reign, this small, poor new government agency that was not only responsible for supplying the army, but also became the powerful engine of state centralization, overriding the authority of the state with a fraction of the population. Of France or Austria, would boast a meticulously trained and disciplined standing army of 30 old feudal councils to collect taxes and administer the realm. By the end of his reign, his small, impoverished state supported men, a military force, completely out of proportion to its size. He was not just a ruler with an army. He a remarkably large and disproportionately powerful standing army of 30,000 highly disciplined men. It was the fourth was creating an army that had a state. Frederick William used largest army in the Holy Roman Empire, yet Brandenburg-Prussia was only the 12th largest state by population. The army, his new army, as a powerful tool in the complex and treacherous world of 17th century diplomacy. He was not just for defense. It was the state's primary raison d'etre. The needs of the military would master of realpolitik, shifting his allegiances with a pragmatic and often cynical lack of sentiment. His primary goal was always the security and enhancement of his own state, not loyalty to any particular cause or ally. His greatest diplomatic triumph came during dictate the state's economic and social policies for the next 200 years. The saying that would later define the kingdom, the Second Northern War between Sweden and Poland. Initially, as a vassal of Poland for his Prussian duchy, he was forced to. Prussia is not a state with an army, but an army with a state, began with the Great Fight for the Polish king. However, after a Swedish victory, he switched sides, allying with the powerful Swedish king, Elector. Frederick William's foreign policy was a masterclass in ruthless pragmatism. He had no permanent allies, only permanent interests. In the complex, shifting landscape of post-Charles X Gustav, in exchange for being granted full sovereignty over the Duchy of Prussia. Then, when the tide of Westphalian Europe, he used his new army as a formidable bargaining chip, selling his allegiance to the highest bidder in war, turned again. He abandoned the Swedes and rejoined the Polish side. His seemingly treacherous maneuvering paid off spectacularly. A dizzying series of alliances. His greatest diplomatic triumph came during the Second Northern War between Sweden and Poland. Initially, at the final Peace of Oliva in 1660, both Poland and Sweden, as well as the Holy Roman Emperor, he was forced to ally with the powerful Swedes. But at the pivotal moment, he switched sides and allied with the Poles, forced to formally recognize his absolute sovereignty over the Duchy of Prussia. He had entered the war as a vassal and emerged. His reward came in the 1660 Treaty of Oliva. For his crucial support, the King of Poland ran as a true European sovereign. He had used his army as a diplomatic bargaining chip, rendering its services to the highest bidder in exchange for tangible territorial and political gains, renounced his historic suzerainty over the Duchy of Prussia. For the first time, the Hohenzollern dynasty ruled Prussia not as a vassal, but as a fully sovereign duke. It was a monumental step towards the creation of a future, all his diplomatic maneuvering. It was a single battle that cemented his military reputation and forged the legend of the new Prussian army. In Kingdom, his greatest military victory came in 1675 at the Battle of Fehrbellin. A Swedish army, allied with the French, had invaded Brandenburg while Frederick William was away campaigning on the Rhine. In a series 1675, during a war against France, Frederick William's main rival, Sweden, allied with the forced marshes of astonishing speed. He rushed his army back, catching the Swedes completely by surprise. At Fehrbellin, French invaded Brandenburg while the main army was away. Frederick William responded with lightning speed. In a daring and now his smaller force outmaneuvered and decisively defeated the supposedly superior Swedish army. The victory was small in scale, but huge famous maneuver known as the sleigh ride. He rushed his army back to Brandenburg, covering a remarkable distance in psychological impact. It shattered the myth of Swedish invincibility and announced the arrival of Brandenburg-Prussia as a serious short time. At the Battle of Fehrbellin, his army, though outnumbered, decisively crushed a portion of the superior Swedish force. Militarily, Fehrbellin was a relatively small engagement, but its psychological and political impact was enormous military power to be reckoned with. The sandbox of the empire now had teeth. Frederick William's Calvinist faith made him a staunch believer in predestination and the absolute sovereignty of God, which mirrored his own belief in the absolute sovereignty of the ruler. However, his personal faith been defeated by the upstart army of Brandenburg. The victory created a surge of patriotic pride and established the reputation of the Prussian army, also made him unusually tolerant for his time, not out of any modern sense of liberal values but for purely pragmatic reasons. For its speed, discipline, and fighting spirit. It was after this victory that his people began to call him the Great Elector. One of Frederick William's most enduring understood that his underpopulated, devastated lands needed people to thrive, and he did not care what brand of Protestantism they practiced, and enlightened policies was born from his Calvinist faith and his pragmatic understanding of state building. He knew that his lands were underpopulated and economically devastated. To rebuild his state, he needed people, particularly skilled and industrious people. His opportunity, his most significant act of religious statesmanship came in 1685, when King Louis XIV of France revoked the Edict of Nantes, outlawing Protestantism and brutally persecuting the French Huguenots. Frederick William saw a golden opportunity. He immediately came in 1685, when King Louis XIV of France revoked the Edict of Nantes, outlawing Protestant, issued the Edict of Potsdam, offering the persecuted Huguenots safe haven in Brandenburg-Prussia. He promised them freedomism and launching a brutal persecution of the Huguenots. While the rest of Catholic Europe stood by, the Great Elector saw a golden opportunity. He immediately issued the Edict of Potsdam. In it, he offered the persecuted French Huguenots safe of worship, tax exemptions, and financial support. Over 20,000 skilled and industrious Huguenots flocked to passage to Brandenburg-Prussia, granting them full civil rights, freedom of worship, tax exemptions, and even financial support his lands, particularly to Berlin. They were merchants, artisans, and entrepreneurs who brought with them invaluable skills in textiles to establish their businesses. It was a remarkably tolerant policy for its age, but it was also an act of brilliant luxury goods and commerce. They revitalized the stagnant urban economy and transformed the provincial town of Berlin into a vibrant and growing city. Economic self-interest. Over 20,000 highly skilled Huguenot refugees flocked to his lands, particularly Frederick William's policy of religious tolerance was not just an act of piety. It was a brilliant and successful act of economic to the small city of Berlin. They were artisans, merchants, manufacturers, and intellectuals who brought with them advanced technologies in and demographic policy. By the time of his death in textiles, luxury goods, and other industries, they revitalized the stagnant economy and transformed the provincial town of Berlin into a vibrant and culturally sophisticated city. The Edict of Potsdam was a testament to his belief that the strength of a state was built. 1688. After a reign of 48 years, the transformation of his state was nothing short of miraculous. On its people and its productive capacity, not on rigid religious uniformity. Frederick William, the great Elector, died in 1688 after a reign of 48 years. He did not hold the title of king. That honor would be achieved by his son, Frederick I, who would use treasury. He had broken the power of the estates, achieved full sovereignty over Prussia, and established his dynasty as a significant player, the army and treasury. His father had built to persuade the Holy Roman Emperor to grant him the title of king. In Prussia, in the complex game of European power politics, he was a classic enlightened despot before the term existed. He was autocratic. 1701. But it was the great Elector who had laid every single foundation stone. He had inherited a ruthless, and his policies were often harsh, particularly for the serfs who were tied to the land to support the Junker aristocracy that officered his army. Yet he was also a tireless servant of the state, a modernizer who built collection of broken, impoverished, and disconnected territories and had forged them into a unified, centralized, and formidable state. He had canals, reformed the postal system, and fostered economic growth. He was not a king. His son, Frederick I, created a disciplined and powerful standing army, a highly efficient civil service, and a tradition of religious tolerance as a tool. Would be the first to claim that title, but he had laid every single foundation upon which the future Kingdom of Prussia would economic growth. He had established a culture of duty, service, and military precision that would define the Prussian state for the next 2 centuries. The small, ridiculed sandbox of the Holy Roman Empire was now a major European power, a kingdom be built. He created the 3 pillars that would define Prussia's rise: a powerful standing army, a disciplined civil service, the General War Commissariat, and a centralized system of taxation to support them both. Frederick William, the great Elector, left behind a legacy that would have his realm, but had set it on the path to becoming the powerful Kingdom of Prussia, a state that would eventually shape the course of German and European history for the next 2 centuries. He had created a new kind of state, a lean, efficient, and highly militarized entity, built for survival and expansion in the harsh political climate of Central Europe. His successors, from the first King Frederick I to the soldier king, Frederick William I, and most famously to his great-grandson, Frederick the Great, would all build upon the foundations he had laid. The army would grow, the bureaucracy would become more efficient, and the ethos of duty, discipline, and service to the state would become deeply ingrained in the Prussian character. He had set in motion the unlikely rise of a small German state that would eventually challenge Austria for dominance in Germany, confront Napoleon, and in 1871, under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck, Unify the under-leaders like Frederick the Great and Otto von Bismarck. Unite all of Germany. German-speaking peoples into a single German empire. The story of modern Germany, in many ways, begins in the